You're listening to the Hello World Podcast, number 17. My name is Sean Wildmuth, and I'm your host. The Hello World Podcast is where you can hear from some of your favorite developers, authors, and speakers about how they got started in this business. We go way back to their first computer, their first code experience, and their first job. This week, I'm delighted to talk to Jim Wilson of JW Hedgehog. He's the last of the 3 interviews I did at the Pluralsight Author Summit in Utah this year. Jim is the president of JW Hedgehog, a consulting firm specializing in solutions for Android, iOS, and Microsoft platforms. He has nearly 30 years of software experience, with the past 12 years heavily being focused on creating mobile device and location-based solutions. After nearly a decade as a Microsoft device application development MVP, Jim now focuses on developing Android and iOS device applications. Jim has authored over 30 articles on device application development and has developed mobility and smart client curriculums for several organizations. Although based in New Hampshire, Jim and his wife spend much of their time in Celebration, Florida, just 3 miles from Walt Disney World. Check out Jim's blog, where he talks about a variety of mobile development issues, as well as the fun of life just 3 miles from the home of the mouse. I first met Jim way back at DevelopMentor in the late 90s, early 2000s. In the past few years, Jim and I have spent a lot of time talking about mobile development, because I'm doing a lot of the Windows Phone development, and he does a lot of Android and iOS. He's always an interesting person to talk to. Let's hear how Jim got started. I'd like to welcome to the show Jim Wilson.
Hi, Sean.
And how long have we known each other? We've known at least of each other. I think this is the first time we've actually met face-to-face, but I knew you 10 years ago?
Oh, easily. I said 10 years. Probably we were both on the circuit, because I went off the conference circuit, around 2005 or so. So it was well before that. When
and you were at DevelopMentor, right?
I was, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think that's where I first ran into you when I was working for the weird little company up in Portland.
Yeah.
That was the offshoot of DevelopMentor.
Yeah, I think it was. We did meet face-to-face at that office one time.
Oh, that's
actually.
right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's
years
right.
ago.
That was, okay, neither of us will mention how long ago that was. Or, how many broken relationships between then and now it was, but several. So when you were growing up, were computers something you were interested in?
Oh, no, not at all. I'm a completely accidental programmer. Completely.
How so?
I was going to be a machinist.
Nice.
When I got out of high school, and I'd actually taken 2 years of metal shop, loved doing lathes, spinning lathes, and that kind of stuff. Signed up for metal shop 3 my senior year. Me and one other person did it. So they dropped me into metal shop 2 over again.
Oh, wow.
And my high school had this brand new course. This is 1981, 82, something like 82, I guess.
Where'd you grow up?
South Jersey, Jersey. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I happened to have the guy who taught that course as my advanced math teacher.
Oh, nice.
And I really liked him.
Yeah.
Skip Waddington. I'll plug Skip Waddington for changing my life, actually. He's like, dude, because I was kind of complaining to him about being bored in metal shop.
Yeah.
And he was like, check out my computer science course. So he signed some paperwork to get me transferred into it, because it was actually technically too late to transfer.
Right.
And
but you were repeating a course anyway. So
yeah, exactly. So they didn't really fight me that much. They try to do that. They try to say, well, it'll be metal shop independent study.
Independent study is the key word for we don't know what to do with you.
Exactly. Yeah. So I went into that and I loved it. I'd never loved doing anything like that in my life before.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And did you have a computer growing up?
No, not at all. No, the first time I'd ever dealt with a computer at all was these TRS-80 things we were dealing with, literally cassette players to store the apps on and stuff. Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah.
That's funny. And what was it teaching? Was it teaching how to use it or programming?
It was programming. It was very general. It's kind of very general introduction to computer programming.
Nice.
We're running some version of BASIC.
Nice.
Literally the 2-letter variable names, $sign to make it a string, that kind of stuff.
And 2-letter variable names because it only took, you could hide it into 2 bytes instead of going over and because every character mattered.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we were some graphics games where, goodness, the things we were going through to do. I mean, what would be horrible? They were horrible graphic for that time.
Sure.
And it still took so much work to do anything.
Much work.
Yeah, exactly. You're moving all the pixels around. Yeah.
And so did that make you think to do it in college, or how did that work?
Well, actually, yeah. I got out and I actually, I still didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I'd like doing that.
Yeah.
So I went to some this is horrible. I went to some automotive school that they said, this programming thing seems kind of big. We'll teach you like 5 programming languages in a year or something like that.
Wow.
So I went to that, and then I started going to college at night. But quite honestly, I never finished college. 2 years after I started working in the day to pay to go to college at night, I got offered a job on Wall Street as a developer.
Oh, nice.
And just jumped over to that and got me off and running,
That's similar to me. I quit because I was learning more at my day job to pay for college than I was learning in college.
Yeah, exactly. I
always meant to go back, but never did.
Exactly. And I had some great bosses. I mean, that really changed my things. My first real boss guy named John, he was this just killer smart guy that just really showed me how to do really practical things, like really understand what you're trying to get done, so kind of get things done that way. And then when I went to Wall Street, I worked for this other guy named Josh, who was just utterly brilliant. His programming got started as paper tape controllers of submarines.
Wow.
That's the software he had worked on. And he just had this brilliant mind. He had his advanced graduate degree in engineering science, and he just taught me tons of stuff. So those guys did far more for me than college ever would have done for me.
Sure. I'm the topic of mentors come up so often in the show, obviously, because, it's to me, that first couple of jobs is so critical to your path.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You can either become complacent or excited about what you do and, or go do something else, right?
Yeah, exactly. And these guys, really, they made it really real for me, is that we're doing this and we're doing this stuff for a reason. We're not just doing it because it's technically fun or anything. We're like, if you're on Wall Street because you're dealing with real money, right? And lots of it.
Billion here, billion there. Eventually, it's real money.
Yeah. Eventually, it starts to matter to somebody, right? Yeah, I mean, like we literally had a guy. Fortunately, he wasn't on my team because if he'd been on my team, he wouldn't have been working anymore. But he dropped several $100,000 in just a couple seconds because literally he hadn't verified his code correctly, and no one else, his boss hadn't looked at it either.
Oh wow!
And he's doing live trading, and he wasn't checking his ACKs properly. And it was acknowledging the trade, and he'd send it again. Acknowledge the trade, and he'd send it again.
Wow. Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Wow. And so when you were in Wall Street, what languages were you using then?
I started out on Fortran.
Oh, okay.
And that's would have been I'm trying to think. It'd been, I guess, 1988, I think it was. Yeah, I guess there was a 4-year gap. Yeah, because I guess I got out of school in 85. I was in 80 straight, and Wall Street in 88, I guess, something like that.
And that was that was what everything on Wall Street was written in then, right?
It was. And the big hardware platform that was just beginning to be phased out then was a company called Prime. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and because Prime kind of slid in at the same time DEC was kind of sliding in, but Prime had gotten a lot of traction on the Wall Street space. And the original version of the Prime operating system was mostly written in Fortran. So all the programs were in Fortran as well.
Yeah.
It's funny, they eventually transferred the hardware over to PL1, but we weren't writing programs with PL1, because PL1's a language that doesn't know what it wants to be,
I've heard that phrase before about PL1.
Yeah, but then I eventually, it's really funny. I transitioned into C originally before I had my own team. I was still working for this guy named Josh, and I kind of got really interested in C because with Fortran we were hitting a lot of trouble. Like we're starting to do data structure stuff, and you can write data structures in anything, but they can get really hard in a language like Fortran.
Yeah.
So
especially I started complex structures where.
Oh yeah, well everything's parallel arrays in Fortran. That's how you do everything, right?
Yeah.
And so what we did is that I first wrote C, and the thing is that the version of hardware we had was only addressable at 2-byte blocks.
Really?
So how do you do character processing, right? So what they did is
were you doing Unicode then? Accidentally.
Yeah. Well, what we had to do is that there was this actual special instruction that could basically take a 2-code block and flip its bits. So if you did any character by character processing, there was these extra set of things running all the time. They were doing double flips of bits, and
so you'd flip the bits, and then you could read the first 8 again to get the character.
Yeah, get the next character. And so that's how I kind of got started in it. And we kind of realized pretty quickly, though, that this hardware is kind of getting phased out and going other ways. So they moved me over to a Unix team, but they put me on this reporting team. And all we were doing were writing reports.
That is I remember the day I was able to take Crystal reports off my resume. It was the best day of my career.
Oh, yeah. And this was some Unix-based thing that was kind of much more kind of 4GL on top of the Informix database engine and stuff. And it's one of those things, I'd been part of the systems team. And they put me on the reporting team.
Oh, wow.
So I kind of...
That's a culture shock.
Yeah, totally. And I hated it. And I liked my job. I liked the company, the people. And there was this kind of thing called PCs that were starting to fire up in 1992. And I went to my boss.
I hear they're going to be big.
Yeah, well, this is the funny story, right? Is that I go to my boss, go, Josh, I really like you, but I hate this work. I think I want to go to this other guy's team. And he was pretty hurt, but he's like, if you're not happy, I don't want to hold you back.
Yeah.
And but it's funny as I went over to that, and I had several friends tell me like, dude, you're throwing your career away, man. You work on real computers. These things are going to be nothing. And I was like, no, I don't think so. I think there might be something going on here, you know, because we were Windows 3.0 back then.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I had John Papa on the show earlier, and he was saying that he was counseled that if he needed to quit all this internet programming and learn COBOL if he wanted a career.
Really?
Yes. Which I think happened a lot. I mean, depending on the language and where you're at, but that same sort of thing is, you know, these things aren't going to last.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, we took a lot of heat too because when we went to the guy that I worked for on a night team, guy named Steve, was he was really good at recognizing user first development.
Oh, nice.
And what we'd come from, that wasn't at all. You generate reports, and if they wanted the number, they found the number on the report. Right. They didn't care. We didn't care. You know,
right there.
It's the third column over. What do you care? It's third or fourth. What do you care? Right.
Yeah.
And we had whole entire teams that were like, why do you even ask the users what they want? You know, they need the data. We know what data they need. We give it to them.
Yeah.
And we were kind of like, no, we think that's not the way this is going to be anymore. We need to put the users first. You know, and and that was, again, it was just another great experience from working with a good guy who really just kind of got me started right. And for me, what worked out really well was that when I joined what we called the PC group at the time was there was one team that was hardware support, phone support, you know, developers, everything. But less than a year after I got there, they realized that it was more important than that, and they split off us as a dev as one side and everything else is the other. And so I suddenly owned the dev group.
Oh, nice.
So it kind of gave me a kind of a big jump out forward to kind of run my own group. And that was fantastic when you're kind of doing all this kind of front end trading systems and you own the group and small, really. I mean, it wasn't agile by the modern term, but it was that idea that you do daily deliveries. You know, you can't tell these guys in 6 months I'm going to fix the program. You know, he wants it fixed. It's fixed tomorrow. You know?
Because it's about cash. It's about the pushing business forward. You know?
Well, absolutely. I mean, and Wall Street, right or wrong, Wall Street understands that very, very well. And we were a partnership. There were like roughly 60 partners, and the partners were your users.
Right.
So the guy who you're giving the app to is a multimillionaire who owns the business. Right. You know, and if he says he wants it, it now became very important.
You get it.
Yeah.
You get it. So when you took over that team, you went from an individual contributor to sort of leading that team? Is that what happened?
Well, what it was is there were kind of me, another full-timer, and a part-timer did all the kind of development, but the guy who ran the group kind of told us what to do. And his background was development. So even though he wasn't actively developing anymore, that was his background. Right. So it went from him being the decision maker and me being, one of two primary implementers to me being the decision maker and an implementer. And interesting. As we grew.
So did you have to learn how to lead the group and mentor the guys coming up and those sorts of things? Was that trial by fire? Or?
It was a bit. One of the things that I had always done is that going back, even when I was 19 years old, I had actually, I always worked teaching people. I originally worked part-time at some tech school, kind of making some extra money.
Nice.
And then when I was working during the day, before I was on Wall Street, I was working during the day, but teaching classes at night to adults. So I'd had a lot of practice kind of looking what people were doing and not telling them how I want to do it, but trying to see where they're going and try to help them find the way. Yeah. You figure by the time I ran my own team, I've been doing that for 6 or 7 years.
And that's more a mentoring attitude than a teaching attitude, right?
I hope so. That was always my goal, because my goal wasn't to teach you how I would solve the problem.
Right.
The goal was to work within your skills to get you to solve the problem. Right.
So that you could solve tomorrow's problem without you.
Exactly. Right? Yeah. Well, I wish I would have said it that well, actually. Yeah. And so that's how I tried to run my group. I mean, admittedly, I did have some struggles at first because, I had a pace I thought things should be getting done and the way I would have done it. And even though I was willing to accept their way of doing it, I wasn't necessarily good with their pace at doing it.
Sure.
So I had to kind of learn to adapt to that a little bit. And that was really hard for me. Probably the first year or so, that was a real struggle.
Well, I think a lot of people who run teams or help mentor teams or whatever the case may be, they have that moment when they finally figure out this is good work and it's good enough that it doesn't have to be the way I would have solved it, right? This whole idea of, it became, when I started to do it, I'm frenetic and I'm workaholic and all that. And when the guys would go home at 5 and I'm like, it's not done. Why are they going home at 5? And then I look at their code and go, that's clearly not the way it should be done because it's not the way I would have approached it. Right.
Yeah.
But once you get far enough away from it, you have some perspective. You're like, But that's not only in many cases is that good enough, but in many cases it's better than I would have done, right?
Oh yeah,
because I have that
ideas.
sort of myopic idea of the way I would solve X or Y or Z, and they tend to, they outlive my usefulness as a leader, right? You think, oh, I'm the leader, therefore I must be the smartest guy in the room, and that's not always the case.
Exactly. Well, and the thing is, when it got fun for me is that once I kind of really embraced that attitude, my work got tons more fun, right?
Sure.
Because I got to think at a different level now.
Yeah.
I could think across, and as the team grew, got to be 8 or 9 people. I was able to think across 8 people implementing, and I could be thinking without all those implementation details.
Yeah.
And then you get that, and your job is even so much more fun.
You have that just view of a project and kind of see where it matters. And
because the day I kind of had to realize that it was a very hard day for me. The day I realized that coding was not going to be a primary part of my day anymore.
Right.
That was a very difficult struggle for me.
That is I think that's still one of the reasons I do a lot of Pluralsight, because it forces me to do a lot of code. Because a lot of the consulting I do, I'm not coding for people. I'm brought in and we help figure out what they're going to do, or help them through a problem, or debug this or that. But I'm not, not doing project work as much as I used to. And Pluralsight helps keep me in that, my fingers in the pie, as it were.
Well, honestly, one of the reasons when I left Wall Street, I actually that would have been early 2000, and just one of those kind of funny things is I worked at the same Wall Street firm for 11 years, I guess.
Wow.
And when I left, I literally my wife and I had just split up, and I went to work that morning. I'd given them over a month's notice that I was leaving. I didn't even have a car. I lived in New York City. I didn't have a car or anything. I decided I'm going to move to New Hampshire. So I rent a car, drive to New Hampshire, hit the first town across the border find an apartment, and just start this whole new life. Because what it was is that
are you in Nashua?
I was in Nashua back then. Yeah,
that's the first. That's the first town you hit.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, Nashua. So you basically, if you're in Massachusetts and you trip, you fall in Nashua. Exactly. Yeah. So I stayed in New Hampshire for a really long time. I only officially moved out of there a couple months ago.
Where do you live now?
Actually, the town's called Celebration, Florida.
Okay.
It's 3 miles from Disney World.
Oh, okay.
And my wife's a Disney freak, which makes me a Disney freak.
Yeah. Well, let's not go down that road.
No, actually, I do quite enjoy it, and we've had a really good time.
That's awesome.
We did this kind of thing a couple of years ago where we bought a really small place in this town called Celebration that's actually built by Disney Corporation.
Yeah.
And it's funny, if you go to Disney World, there's the big sign that says "Welcome to Disney World." Our house is closer to that sign than the gates of the Magic Kingdom are.
That is funny.
Yeah.
That is funny.
But we went down there and we thought we would just winter down there, and go back to New Hampshire the rest of the year. But we just enjoyed it so much. And the cool thing was I was doing a ton of Pluralsight work or remote consulting work. So it's like, hey, you want to stay?
Matter.
Yeah, we'll stay.
Yeah.
And that's kind of
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to one of the ideas that when you're working at the Wall Street firm, one of the things I find with a lot of the developers I've worked for in the past is they're so caught up in the work that they don't understand that output, right? That the reason we have to do it this way on this schedule is because some sales guy signed the contract, and he signed the contract so that there was enough money to pay me, right? That's the whole loop, right? That at some point, the stuff I build has to end up as revenue so that they can pay me my salary. And I'm fascinated by this, especially when there's that, and it sounds like a really quick loop in your case, right?
Right.
You're doing daily, or, you're fixing it so that they can go and continue to do their trades.
What we actually had to do, because this would have been, through the 90s, we actually had to build our own automatic update system. What we literally did, we had to build our own infrastructure for this, is that each morning when the folks would come in, because networks weren't reliable enough in the early 90s, is that what we do is that we literally were running terminal connections off our mainframes into the back of their PCs, right? That they would do a download every morning to pull their data for the day.
Nice.
So it'd be local. Well, we built a whole infrastructure that we would scan their systems for all our apps, look at our servers, see what the current versions were, and we would do dynamic updates to their systems as part of their daily process.
Wow.
And we had to build that because our demands were to be able to deliver however fast that met. And there were times where every single day a new version was going out.
Wow.
Yeah. And the thing was really, I think, a real blessing for me was because I came from the systems background, I understood the importance of infrastructure.
Right.
So, because one of the things that I had done is that there was a guy on my team who had a systems background as well. And I actually pulled him out of the production cycle and had him start building infrastructure, but I kept the rest of my team in the production cycle. So all of my management was happy.
Right.
We're doing production. But we had talked about, we knew we needed this infrastructure down the road. And we got it in place. And so then we were able to actually exceed their expectations, which is always what you're going for.
Always.
Terms of it, and of course they still complain about something, but
of course,
we can stay on top of it.
That's their nature.
Yeah, exactly. It's it's our job to disappoint them. It's their job to be disappointed. Right?
Exactly. So how did you go from a system engineer to Android guy?
That actually, I guess that kind of came from after I left, I went out on my own. I was doing a lot of, I kind of went around databases for a little bit first. But I went into the OLADB route. I was really into that OLADB API and stuff. And
you're the one, yeah.
Yeah, I am the one. Yes. Well, actually,
you and Bob Bushman.
Yeah, and I've actually built an OLADB server that went into production.
Wow.
How's that? On Wall Street, as a matter of fact.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, to kind of back up a little bit, the reason I got confidence to go out on my own is I had done all this OLADB stuff, and it was hard, right? It was hard.
It's hard.
Yeah, and I was struggling with it. And so I went to a training course on it with Bob Bushman.
Right.
And because I just
He's the guy that teaches it.
Yeah, right. And it's and I figured I was just missing it, right? And I talked to Bob for a week. He's like, no, it is hard, And it's funny, it was that the fact that I had suffered through that and succeeded gave me the confidence to go out on my own.
Oh, right.
Right. So within, I think, a year of that, or maybe two at most, but I think a year of that, I went on my own. But I got involved in the mobile space very early. I got involved in mobile. My first production mobile app was 2001.
Was that like Pocket PC or something?
It's a Pocket PC that actually was a chemical controller. We actually had GPS. We put it into those old iPac sleds. If you remember those?
I do.
Yeah, we had an octopus that had 4 serial ports on it. So I guess half an octopus.
Yeah.
And we put an external GPS on it, and we actually plugged it into a trailer that was an array of chemical sprayers.
Wow.
And what we had done was that we'd send someone out with a Pocket PC to gather data on where chemicals had to go. Mm-hmm. We'd process that, download it, and then you could get that had to be an expert. Then you could get some junior guy just literally drive a golf cart around the golf course or a farm. Yeah. And we were turning chemicals on and off based on the GPS feed.
Wow.
And so that was like, wow, nothing I ever did on a desktop was that much fun.
No, absolutely.
Literally you're watching your app drive by, and this is 13 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And so I spent a lot of time in the Windows Mobile space. But at some point, I became very aware that Windows Mobile was not going to be the future.
Sure.
I didn't have the confidence in Windows Phone that you do. And so I looked around.
Like we've ever had that conversation.
Yeah.
I'm not sure confidence is the right word, but I'm enamored. Let's put it that
that's
way.
true. Yeah. And so I looked around and I was like, well, I really like mobile. I don't want to go anywhere else.
Yeah.
And I had the opportunity prior to Android's release to do a research project for a client.
Oh, nice.
They were looking at a couple different platforms. They had hired me they knew I knew the Windows space really well. Mm-hmm. They go, we want you to kind of dig into Android and tell us what you think of it.
Yeah. And is this before the Google purchase or after?
This would be after. It would be after because it was actually already in pre-release. So it was still, it was a Google product. It was maybe like 0.5 release or something like that. And even at that point, I looked at it and I was like, wow, these guys build a mobile platform that's based on exactly the way people use it.
Right.
And because it's a different approach to the OS, a different approach to object lifetime.
Yeah.
And I just like, wow, these guys really get this. So I just it was kind of a background project for a little while until I got really into it and then became what I do.
What you do, yeah. And do you do any iOS or is it really just Android?
I do iOS as well. I've done some iOS work for clients as well. Admittedly, I like Android better.
Sure.
But I think a lot of times it's the philosophy of Android I like as well. Sure. Is that if you're on there's some stuff I was doing from a company that we did a lot of heavy location work, a lot of heavy background work. And in the Android space, that was very natural.
Right.
In the iOS space, we had to kind of reinvent how we did a lot of the background work.
Yeah.
Even though we figured it out, we'd have to. Apple would reject our efforts.
Yep.
Even though we did everything based on what you're able to do without bucking the APIs in any way, they're like, no, we don't think you should be doing that. And where in Android, it's kind of like, hey, if you can do it, if you're not hurting anybody, go ahead.
Yeah. iOS is the only one that ever gave me a problem with any of my apps, and I'm about to get rid of the only device I have that I can deploy an iOS app with because I'm just done. I just can't deal with, and it's all about it's not even about the work. It's about the certification process. I just can't deal.
Yeah, it's just a hassle. Yeah, because I mean, Objective-C is an interesting language, but it's it's just kind of academically interesting to me, sort of thing. I think it makes things kind of harder than they need to be.
I mean, I used to do C++, so I thought I would take to it pretty easily. And then, I think I've been in managed code too long to feel like the the 4-time duplication that I feel like you have to do in Objective-C around, okay, not only do the headers and the implementation files have to match, but now you have these attributes that sort of need to match.
Yeah.
And it just, I'm like, this is a lot of paperwork and not a lot of work, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, no one except Apple could have been successful with that model.
Yeah.
Right. You had to have you had to be a company who could just market themselves and had the following so well. No one else would have ever succeeded with that model.
No, not at all. Not at all. Yeah. Well, it's been great talking to you.
You as well, Sean. I appreciate the chance.
Yeah, I'm glad we finally got together, and I hope everything goes well. And I hope your courses do almost as well as mine.
Well, almost as well.
That's the goal.
If I could be just behind you, I'll be happy. So,
well, thanks a lot.